there, and then MIKE. Link, typing L I N K. Paste. All right, done. Down there. Okay. So any moment now we should be joined by Mike Jacob. Mike Jacob he represents the longshoremen, the waterfront, and who also made the comment that actually Miley Mabron addressed, who's the project manager. Here's Mike.
Yes.
Hey, how you doing?
Great. How are you?
I am fantastic. Better to have you here. What do you think about what happened today?
Well, I guess I've got a lot of feelings about it, but the primary one is that I was really happy that every single one of the council members was on message with respect to seaport compatibility measures being real and needing to be addressed, and frankly being the driver for a lot of what we were hearing from Councilmember Kaplan and her amendments as being the transportation focus. I mean, that's just undeniable. Huge components of what needs to happen still are, how do you identify the components of the infrastructure that need to be paid for and who's paying for them? I mean, that's just undeniable. So I think that they took that straight on, and all that is a good thing. I mean, some of the takeaway I think for the city is that's a little bit unfortunate is it seems like they were kind of bidding against themselves a little bit. And they shouldn't have been doing that. I mean, they could have put the ball back in the A's court and said, if you don't like this, show us another middle pathway besides just coming in and saying, we'll give you an out on all the offsite improvements. And I think Councilmember Kalb kind of hit it straight on the head. He said, if you have mitigation measures that are due to your project, you got to pay for them. That doesn't mean that there aren't creative ways to finance those things, and I know that that's one of the things that you've been talking about really directly with people for a long time. But that's aside, I think, from the fact that you've got issues and you need to deal with the issues. So I don't know. And then I guess if there's a political takeaway, it's if you're the A's and you just spent all this time building up your base talking about why July 20th was really important. What the hell just happened? You had like 5 fans call in, which is really expensive in terms of the amount of money they spent on July 20th, in terms of all the ads and all that stuff. And then I think the other big takeaway is their labor support actually turned out to be not what they anticipated. When you hear the head of the Central Labor Council say, we want a yes vote on this, when the head of the A's is sitting there saying, this doesn't work for us, you've lost a little bit of your cover.
Hey, help me out. The county's the next meeting, right?
That's a good question. I don't know. When is the next meeting? I mean, they go on summer break, right?
Yeah, I thought it was August, September, something like September. Yeah, it's September, Mike, because I remember that Nate was saying we're going to be carried into September because the county is doing its own due diligence.
Yeah.
What bothers me, and maybe you can talk me down from the ledge about this whole thing, because I continue to believe, I understand you guys don't want the stadium there and all that, but we have the sea level rise issue we talked about. But my big issue, overarching, is that, and I had a big argument with the councilman I'm not going to name as the hearing was going on. I was calling, and I was pretty much in tears. And I just said, look, why don't you focus on how much money is available from TIF? And we started doing, or she started doing, I'll say he or she or whatever, says, well, it's the IDL here. And I said, no, look, you have one increment source. Forget all that. You know what that tells me? It tells me they don't understand the project. I said all you have to do is shoot for a target base year assessed value of $2 billion. At that, at 4% rate of growth, 1.6 billion. Unless of course you negotiate with tax agencies, you're looking at 2.6 billion. Okay, and you can go and give Dave and company the 350 million buyback, and you're looking at least you're looking at an $800 million bond issue total. You're looking at about over 500 million to play with. You can use that for maritime concerns. You see what I'm getting at? It makes me cry, man.
Yeah.
It's like I feel like I'm watching the zoo, and I'm watching these zoo animals fight each other, and I'm trying to get them to stop, and I just like beating on the window like because they're killing each other, and they won't listen. And then like he's saying to me, or I keep saying regardless, the councilman is saying to me, well, we took that up in the community in the funding conference. They didn't have a funding conference because I said the first thing I said was, well, tell me what the bond structure is going to be. Nothing. Tell me how much the increment revenue is going to be. Nothing. They didn't have a funding conference. I mean, and these are people who are so junior level. They don't know that they don't know because the staff is telling them one thing, and it's the blind leading the blind.
I think you're back to the same problem that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, which is if you're looking at this from a funding capacity issue, you're doing it the wrong way. You're not looking at what is it that you're paying for.
Yeah.
And that's our fundamental disconnect on this too. I mean, it's and that's why I said I think the biggest takeaway for us is it's a good win on the opponent's side, because I mean essentially what we've been asking for is them to say no, but if they aren't saying no, to tell the A's to come to the table and be realistic and talk about transportation infrastructure.
I want to get something out of the way because Eric Sterling said, "Does any white talk to this guy? He's against the popcorn." 2 reasons: A, is my friend. B, I'll tell you, Mike isn't against a good deal. Tell me if I'm wrong, right?
Yeah, I think we're at this place where we're gonna and you saw it in this meeting too. I mean, there are just philosophical issues with where to go for this type of infrastructure versus that type of infrastructure, this use versus that use, and reasonable people are going to disagree, and obviously we disagree with where this goes. But if it's going to go forward, it needs a framework, and the framework has to work for people if you're going to achieve the policy goals. And the policy goal that we're hearing from the city, and frankly that we hear from the port, and we get lip service from on the A's, is we want to be able to make this a deal that works for everybody. And we want it to be a win-win. And so it puts everyone in that position. I mean, we're going to win or lose on the question of the land use, but we're not going to lose on our side on the question of, do the A's have to mitigate impacts to us? So I think that's what I'm saying in the context of this, and I'm glad we're having that conversation because it's one that needed to be happening, and that was the thing that we've been most frustrated about with the positioning from the A's. It wasn't how do we make your problem go away. It was to denigrate our problem, said it didn't exist, call us fear mongers, all of that. That didn't happen at the city council. They said your issues are legitimate. Let's deal with them. We know they're expensive. We might need to go to a third party to start addressing those things, i.e., the state or federal government or somebody else. And then that'll raise some other questions that, I think to your point, on one hand, but to a bigger point on the other hand, to your point, how do you leverage value out of the project to take care of issues that are homegrown yourself? But the other hand is, this is a little bit of emperor has no clothes. If you go around for 3 years talking about how you're going to privately finance this project and take care of all the impacts, then you're sitting there and you've got a city saying, well, we could go ask other people for public money. I can't imagine that's sitting well over, with the A's brass. Now I have to deal with the city council and the state legislature and Congress for this project. And that's tough. That's a tough place to be.
I continue to I hold that you can't do a project without knowing how much money you've got up front. And like people keep asking me about the state, like, 280 million is like a big difference. And yeah, it makes a difference. But first of all, you're staring at a potential 2.6 billion if you negotiate with taxing agencies from tax increment financing. And if you can't figure out what to do with that money, then as far as I'm concerned, the city needs to bounce everybody in charge. I don't care what seat they sit in. I don't care how good a friend they are to me. The bottom line is, this is malpractice. And I will go to my grave saying that, which I hope comes way in the future. But, I really am tearfully sad that our city does not understand how to do big development projects. And this has become way over politicized in a way that, and I like your comment about this as a way of shutting myself up, but I don't believe we would have been in this situation with a council manager form of government. What say you?
I think that's almost inevitably true, and I don't think that that's necessarily unusual for big cities either, right? I mean, you've got more constituencies and more voices, but you don't have the same type of setup, right? So you've created this polarization already within the city governance. Got a train coming by, but I think the long and short of it is what you saw today was people who are honestly trying to bring the A's along with them to the table, so for folks that are opposed to the project, on one hand, it looks like, I guess, on the surface, it could be a bit of a setback. But at the same time, there's no there other than essentially giving direction to staff, telling people what they want to have negotiated. That's a good thing, right? Have all that stuff done in public, have the voices out there, people know what to expect. And for us, like I said, the biggest takeaway is I don't have a project opponent right now in the A's management that's walking around town telling people that they can ignore me because I don't have an issue, because I had every single member of city council saying, no, those are real issues, got to go deal with them.
Yeah.
So I think that is a win.
Yeah, definitely. You guys are in court against the A's right now, right?
We are.
How's that going?
There's a Court of Appeal hearing. So the question that we brought up was what type of review process is going to be applied to the environmental document. And the question is whether or not they missed a date for their certification or not. So we were in Alameda County Superior Court. At the beginning of the year, they ruled against us and we appealed. And the hearing on that court case is going to be August 3rd at the Court of Appeal.
What's the name of that case? What's the case? Who's the judge on that?
Well, it's a 3-judge panel at the Court of Appeal. The Alameda County Superior Court judge was Judge Wise. She's one of 3 different CEQA judges that they have.
CEQA is California Environmental Quality Act, just FYI.
And so we're, all the briefing is done on that case. We asked for expedited appellate review. So did the state and the city. Everyone agreed that this should be heard on a tight timetable. And so we're looking forward to having that hearing and getting a decision soon. That won't impact the substance of the EIR in any appreciable way, but it will impact, the access to it, the review of that, and the timeline. So in the ideal world for us, obviously we would want the Court of Appeal to come back and say that the certification deadline had been missed. And obviously for an ideal situation for the A's, they want to make sure that certification stays in place.
Hey, can you tell my viewers, because John Mark said, what? A lot of viewers are not aware that you're in court against the A's. Can you tell them what's going on? We talk a lot in the weeds, which is fun, but...
I think just the easiest way to explain that issue is that there are certain different projects that under California environmental law have an expedited review process. They had to go through a certification process with the state to maintain that ability to have an expedited review. That authority actually sunsetted, which means that there was no authority left after January 1st of 2020, so just over a year and a half ago. But the A certification wasn't done by that time. And the question really is which rules apply to this project and the EIR going forward? So obviously all the environmental rules in general apply to the project, but what project timelines are going to deal with the supervision of the environmental review? So I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of details to it, but in short, it's basically, can you move faster through the review after the final EIR is certified if there's litigation, or does it move at the normal pace? Is basically the question. And so it is relatively peripheral to most of the substantive questions, because theoretically, if you had a perfect EIR, there'd be nothing to challenge, and this question would be moot.
How much of this could be satisfied or done better if there was a better EIR to begin with, and the city really worked with the athletics? Because a lot of this has been the athletics structuring this vision, and the city not structuring its own vision. What about that?
It's tough. So for environmental review, technically the client and the owner of the document is the public agency, and the city is the lead agency. So for all intents and purposes, it's their decision as to whether or not their environmental documents are adequate or not. You can have a project sponsor that A, pays for everything, B, provides all the experts, and obviously C holds all the risk. But as the lead agency, you're still supposed to be able to turn around and say, nah, I want to do this right, or no, I want to do it better. I don't want it to say that. And there's always push and pull on every project like that. And that, Zinni. I mean, going back for years, what project proponent didn't want their environmental docs to come out faster, or cleaner or cheaper? But that raises the question, I think, of timing. And do you think that it's reasonable to expect a project which is more complex, has more moving parts, and deals with a lot of known environmental issues, including the ones at this site with respect to toxics and things like that? Do you think it's reasonable for that process to move forward than other projects that are simpler, more streamlined, don't have as many moving parts?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think we all know the answer to that. And the answer is, this one moved faster. That means it's going to have more issues. And it did. So there are 400 comments on the project from all, walks of life, from all kinds of folks. So from folks like ours that were focusing on issues broadly related to adequacy, because we are doing a deep dive into the project, to just regular one-off interest area folks, and that includes a lot of the environmental community that put in comments, and then other public agencies like when AC Transit and BART and Capitol Corridor put in comments. That's not politically motivated. They have professional staff that are sitting down and they're looking at these documents. They're saying, I think this is adequate. I think this is inadequate. I think they've addressed my issue here. They haven't addressed it there. But those comments don't really have an agenda. And then there are a lot of other broader comments, including from BCDC and state lands, that went to the adequacy of the entire document, asking whether or not it was a project level EIR.
Are you listening? Oh, okay. Sorry, Mike. Go ahead.
No, it's okay. Yeah. So I think there's a lot to be unpacked there, but that will all happen whether or not the Court of Appeal on August 3rd comes back and says the review is expedited or the review isn't expedited.
And so that's really the next big date. That's one day before my birthday.
Oh, happy birthday!
Thank you.
Yeah. Couple weeks.
A couple weeks. Any chance that you'll be able to talk with the A's between now and then?
Yeah, I'm not expecting a phone call, but if we got one, we'd be happy to take it. I think honestly, the next couple of things that are happening on seaport compatibility are conversations that are ongoing with the port. They are soliciting more input from commercial stakeholders, and that's a good thing. And so those conversations are really next up for us. Those are the most important components.
Mike, I'll let you go, and I'll deal with the brethren and all the questions myself. I think one is John Shore. I don't know. He says, "Why does it matter if the A's missed the EIR deadline?" Can you straighten him out?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the real question is on that. I think if you're speaking to the certification deadline, is there's only so much authority that's granted for streamlining by the legislature. And you had to be a project that met certain parameters, and you had to get certification for those parameters by the government, and in particular by the Office of Planning and Research, and by the governor by a certain date. So those were either met or they weren't met, and that's the question in the lawsuit.
So there you go, John, and that's why. And you should not, for the record, you shouldn't miss any deadlines in development projects. And for those of you watching who claim to be A's fans, I suggest you become fans of stadium development. First, it's a hell of a lot of fun. Second, you discover that there are responsibilities that developers should be aware of, and fans should be aware of, and hold your organization, hold the A's feet to the fire and say, hey, look, have you met your deadlines? Have you taken your vitamins, basically? Have you taken care of what you need to take care of? Have you paid your bills? Those are basics. So we're talking about the basics of life in a sense, right, Mark?
Yeah. I think that's a good point, because if the A's had been able to prove to the Air Resources Board that their plan for moving forward on GHGs was acceptable by the deadline, this litigation wouldn't even exist. But they weren't able to do that on time, and so now the question arises, well, does this deadline apply to this project or not? And that's basically what the litigation is asking. Is there any substance to the fact they missed this deadline? And we're arguing that there is. They're arguing that they aren't. We'll get that issue resolved one way or the other. But you're right. I mean, the fact of the matter is that this is a very complicated project, and it raises a lot of issues. And when that happens, typically, what you would expect from governmental agencies is not that things speed up. It's that things slow down. And when you have more moving parts and more variables, you shouldn't expect everyone to just say, oh, well, let's just deal with it in a way which is less controversial, because that's not how that happens. Or let's do it in a way which is less expensive, because that never happens. Or let's do it in a way which is faster. That's just not how these things are set up. But that's what we've got here. We've got a problem. Let's speed it up. And that was today, right? That was July 20th.
Yep.
The A's got their timeline from the city. They didn't like it, so they went out and they, complained about it, and they bought a bunch of ads, and they said, let's do everything on July 20th. And you saw what happened. The council member said, this doesn't look like it's ready for prime time. And they were right. And
Yeah.
and Dave himself, rightfully so, said, I don't know what this means, I just saw it. That's not how you do development agreements.
How do you have? That's the thing, though. Why would Rebecca issue what feels like an 11th hour, resolution that the A's didn't see, and then essentially do it right in their face in the middle of a council meeting?
You'd have to ask her and the A's. What, if I was the project applicant, I would have had an open channel to the vice mayor once she put out what she put in that packet, saying, here are the issues that I want to deal with. I would have had that conversation. I mean, there's certainly nothing stopping them from having that conversation out of that meeting.
No. What I get from what Dave's response was publicly was, hey, it's a bird that's flying over my, where'd this come from? That's the reaction that he offered.
Yeah. And it seemed genuine to me. I mean, first time any of us saw it, right? It wasn't, that language wasn't in the staff report. In any typical time, and this, this is not how meetings at public agencies work.
No.
You don't have brand new rewritings of things on the dais. That would not fly. You also don't have actions where there's no public comment on what's being voted on either, because it hasn't been circulated to the public. Is this a byproduct of COVID? A little bit. Is it a byproduct of the fact that this wasn't actually a real action today? Honestly, it's just a direction to staff. Yeah. Is there any consequence to today's action? Yes. Is there any consequence to today's action? No. I think that's why we're taking it as a win. The biggest consequence for us is, and I got to take this next call, is that what we want to see is people taking our issues seriously, and that's what's most important.
I think that's what's happened. I do. Mike, We'll talk to you later.
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, see ya.
Take care.
Yeah, you too. See ya. Okay. So, folks, that was Mike Jacob he was the attorney representing Longshoreman. I am going to break now. It's at 5:06 Eastern, and we'll